Welcome to Taste Buds. I'm Debra Eckerling, goal strategist, writer, and foodie. And today I'm speaking with Abby J. Leibman, who's president and CEO at MAZON, a Jewish response to hunger. Welcome, Abby.
Thank you, Deborah. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we dive into the fun part of food, because we will of course get there, can you explain what MAZON is and how you came to work for this amazing organization?
Absolutely. Mazon, a Jewish Response to Hunger, is almost 40 years old, and it was founded by some very visionary leaders in the Jewish community who felt that it wasn't enough to simply talk about how important it was to feed people. It was more of an imperative to take our Jewish values and work to change what those circumstances are that drive people into food insecurity, poverty, and really try to make a difference. So Mazone was founded to work to address hunger and its causes. And for decades now, what we've been doing is engaging in policy work through communities and synagogues, and of course, directly with elected officials to try to not only lift up the awareness about this issue and how pervasive it is in the United States, but also to say that there is a possibility of ending hunger in this country. We almost did it once, and we can do it again. And our mission is to mobilize people to work with us, to be passionate about the work that we're doing, to try to get policy change that will lead to the end of hunger in America.
So we talk about food as sustenance
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that so many people do not have it
Yeah.
to um to basically perform, if you don't eat, you don't you can't
You,
function. See,
correct. Yes.
see, nice little
Mm-hmm.
example. No, I'm kidding. I did have lunch before we chatted, but it's sustenance, but it's also what about the community part of it?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not just about the food we eat, but it's the sharing of the meals and
Mm-hmm.
coming together. So how
Yeah. I think it's really important for us to recognize that just as we who have more privilege or more resources love to share food, many Jewish holidays are steeped in food traditions. And um, it's part of our culture, it's part of the culture of many human beings. And it is not just a moment of fueling your body so you can keep going. It's also a moment of fueling your soul and understanding that sharing food and that the food that speaks to you in terms of your culture and your history and your family, that this is something that many of us get to take for granted that people who are struggling cannot. And nobody's tradition is to eat, an apple and some saltines and call that dinner. That's reprehensible, but that does happen. And, you know, you're absolutely right to suggest that it isn't just about sustaining life, although it's obviously essential for that. It's about sustaining people's humanity, their dignity, a sense of being a whole and participatory American. And it's hard to turn your back on that.
we know we need big change from the top, but
Mm.
what still are little things people can do if they feel really strongly about this?
There are issues about um, keeping it possible for people to eat what is culturally appropriate for them and consistent with the kinds of healthy diets that they've been told they have to maintain. And, you know, suggesting that we, as the body politic, know better what everybody should eat than individuals do is is a really disrespectful way of approaching this. So the idea that there are local communities, there are states that are very active in advancing much more, um, we'll call them human centric proposals about how to cope with issues of food insecurity in those locations. So it doesn't require you to lobby the federal government, if that feels something that is sort of beyond where you'd like to engage, there are ways to engage on the local level too, and to think about the whole notion of what will be more systemic in its reach rather than one time, one moment, one individual.
We do not want band-aids. We want cures, is what you're
Correct.
saying.
That is correct. Yes.
So you've been with Mazon for a while. What brought
Mhm.
you to it? And how do you
Mhm.
you basically like live in food world, but
Mhm.
really not really.
Oh, no, really. So I will tell you that I've been at MAZON for 12 years, and I I've worked in the social justice space my entire career. I'm a lawyer by training. I worked for a large legal services organization here in Los Angeles, which actually, when I was there, was really small. And then I went on to co-found the California Women's Law Center with two friends, and I ran it for 12 years. And the opportunity with Mazone came up at a time when I really wasn't looking. I was doing consulting work and teaching, and I really liked that life. It was nice. But the more I learned about Mazone, and the more people kept reaching out to me saying, "We think you'd be perfect at this," I thought, well, okay, now I kind of understand, the more I know, why it is you would think that way. So I I gave the board a tentative yes, and said I really had to meet the staff before I would commit entirely, because if
Smart.
they didn't like me, that was not going to be a great fit. Um, so I got to the offices, and it was probably like 9:30, and I came in and I saw the COO, Barb Green, and said, um, you know, who I introduced myself, whatever. And we walk into the conference room, and there's just like a giant table with fruit and bagels and, coffee and everything. And I said, "Oh," I said, "I'm so glad. I didn't know if I should bring something. If I didn't even know if you guys eat. I didn't know if you were kosher. I didn't know it." And she said, "Abby, are you kidding? We're an anti-hunger organization. All we do all day is talk about food. So all we do is eat." And I thought, I can work here. This works really well for me. And I often have friends who'll say things to me like, "Oh, this is, we're, I feel guilty." And people actually say to me, "I feel guilty eating in front of you." And I was like, that's ridiculous. The point of this is that you you use your resources as you have them. You don't waste them, you don't squander them, but you also recognize that other people may not have the privilege that you do. And then what you do, apart from enjoying yourself, is to say, "This inspires me to want to make sure other people can have this kind of positive experience with food." And I I love food. I'm a big foodie. I love eating in restaurants. I used to love cooking. I guess I have to admit, during the lockdowns of the pandemic, I was sort of like, okay, I'm totally over it. And so sort of, sorry. um, but I find it off. I bake a lot, and I find that a very Zen experience. So I see, as we talked about a little earlier, the idea that food and the preparation of food is itself a ritual that is both calming and and really uplifting in some really important ways.
I love how you were talking about, enjoying food, and it really puts you in a position of strength
Mm,
in terms of inspiring you so other people can
yeah.
enjoy. And
Hmm.
then now let's talk about, and I totally get there's definitely been some over boredom with cooking, but you said you love baking.
Yeah.
So what is it about it? It's is it the therapeutic, the disconnect? What?
Probably all of that, both of that. I find it kind of zen because, like, because it's chemistry, and excuse me, you have to be really focused or you're going to screw it up. So cooking can be improvisational. Baking not so much, unless, I mean, you really are a professional, successful baker and you're able to do that kind of thing. It's more follow the measurements and mix things at the appropriate times and for the appropriate time. And I find that if I think about anything else, it distracts me and the recipe is not a success.
Do you have a favorite recipe to share?
So since we're talking about bake, I had two in mind, and I can tell them both. So the first one is a family recipe that was my grandma's and then my mom's and then mine. She has a brownie recipe, and the story goes that my grandma was making brownies from a recipe, and she accidentally splashed some water into the batter, and she didn't want to throw it out because she was almost done. And so she made the brownies anyway, and they came out better than she had ever made them before. So this is a recipe that incorporates water into it, which is a highly unusual liquid to put into brownies. It still has vanilla and all that other kind of stuff that normally is that forms the sugar and butter really form the liquid, which I find bizarro, but apparently chemically that's what they are. And that's my go-to when I suddenly realize I'm supposed to bring dessert to something and I forgot, because the ingredients in brownies are pretty much in your pantry. Certainly in my house where chocolate is an obsession. We have a lot of chocolate in our house. So that would be my baking recipe that I love.
And because you thought of two, far be it for me to stop you from sharing the other one.
See, the other one's more like cooking, and it's very improvisational because when my children were young, and I was then running the California Women's Law Center, I worked long hours, and I would pick them up from after school, and we get home. And I think people who have young children will recognize this. They cross the threshold, and immediately it's what's for dinner? Where's dinner? What's happening? I'm thinking, I don't know. It's 5:30 and I forgot. I don't know. So I created what I call pizza in a pot, which is basically egg noodles. So, like, I used to do it with the lovely broad egg noodles, and cook the noodles, and then you heat up a tomato sauce, which you might have made homemade over the weekend and frozen. I don't know, but it could be a jar. And then you simmer like a vegetable or vegetables in it: zucchini, spinach, broccoli. This is how I got green vegetables into my children. Sometimes I would shred the zucchini so they didn't even know it was in there. Same with the broccoli. And sometimes throw in black olives, and then I put the noodles back in. And somehow, I can't call those egg noodles pasta. They're noodles. I don't know psychologically or.
No, I'm with you on it. It's a different category.
Right. It's a noodle.
For sure.
So put the noodles back in the pot with the sauce, and then I put shredded mozzarella cheese in there.
Yum.
You stir it all around, and it's a big, sticky, chewy, stretchy.
Yum.
Yeah, yum. It's kind of a bowl of yum, and it's very balanced. And if you use a jarred sauce, it's just like ready in like 10 minutes. So
I think if you don't already have a name for it, I think we should be calling it bowl of yum.
Well, you could. We called it pizza in a pot, but bowl of yum works for me too.
Right? Why not? Why use one name when two do the trick?
Yeah.
And it really goes to show. So, and you're talking about cooking for the family. So it's not just about the food, but it's about sitting down and having sustenance.
Right. Yeah.
To recap your day with.
Of course.
And then brownies for dessert. So
yeah, if I was smart enough to make those some point in advance. When you're a full-time working mom, you look for shortcuts everywhere, which, when I think about what this means when you are not, as I am, upper middle class, you are conscious of the fact that for many mothers, they can't do this, that many of them are working 2 jobs. The idea of like bringing their children home and then being able to have a full-on meal and sit together becomes really a struggle because they don't have the time. And when we think of resources that people who are the working poor in particular have, time isn't one of them. So there are struggles here that are almost invisible that, societally, I don't know that we can do a lot about. Perhaps individual employers can do something about it. I don't know. I think that the pandemic did teach us that remote work is possible, and that for single mothers, I'm I'm pretty sure that it was a remarkable shift in how they could manage their lives, and I think that's important to pay attention to too.
And it ties back into what you were saying a few minutes ago. It's being able to create these meals and have this family time.
Mm-hmm.
Your blessings almost put you in a position of power in order to want to help others so they can have
Yeah.
their version
Mm-hmm.
of what it is that you have.
Right.
And isn't that when it all I always look on the happy side. When it all boils down to it, even
Mm-hmm.
if there are little things that you can do to spread that love of food and community,
Mm-hmm.
what's stopping you? One person can make a difference.
Yes. Well, I think um, I think one person combined with another person combined with another person. I really just I have to think that in a country that's the size of the United States, it, it's the idea that we are all the community for each other. So people will talk about they're willing to help their community. Well, your community has 335 million people in it. And you really need to think in terms of how many connections you have to make in order to make certain that you can have an impact on that whole community. And I think when I think about what is government, I think of government as community writ large. And the idea that it isn't possible for me to invite everybody who's food insecure in my neighborhood, let alone in Los Angeles, into my kitchen. I can't. But what I can do is press our board of supervisors to make sure that they are doing everything they can to facilitate people accessing programs that give them nutrition support and providing employers with the kind of supports they need to be able to have flexible work hours and work structures, and to create policies that say that single mothers have access to the kinds of childcare and transportation that they need. um, that's those are all those causal factors that we talked about that we also have to think in terms of um, addressing through policy too. That's how they work.
Well, I feel like I've got like a crash course in food policy, and I
Mm.
really appreciate you taking the time to
Mhm.
share, your personal connection with food as well as what
Mhm.
you do and why it's important and how 1 + 1 + everybody equals making change. Where can people learn more about you and Mazon?
It's a pretty easy website. It's mazon.org. So that's it.
And
And
the
you can,
Hunger Museum?
so if you go to our website at mazon.org, you will find an access point to get to the hungermuseum.org, which is the other website. But the general website will get you there. So it's and there's a lot on the website. There's lots more data points, and there are actions people can take. And there's highlights of the stuff we do in states as well as at the federal level.
Wow, all roads lead to food.
Totally.
Thank you so much, Abby J. Leibman, for joining me today. And thank you for tuning in to Taste Buds with Deb. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. And you can go to jewishjournal.com to get the recipes, the bowl of yum / pizza in a pot and brownies, and read the articles that go with each episodes. You can also learn more at tastebudswithdeb.com. Until next time, bon appetit.